Hello, this is Alex Parker, and you're listening to the Emergency Broadcast Network. It's been 6 months. 6 months since the world as we knew it crumbled. The skies are still darkened by the ash of cities long reduced to rubble. The air is thick with an eerie silence, only interrupted by the occasional howl of the wind or the distant groans of the undead. Before the outbreak, we were just like any other species, fragile, selfish, proud. A species so consumed by its own technological advancements that we never stopped to ask whether we were truly in control. And then it happened. It didn't come with the roar of an army or the explosion of bombs, but in whispers. A virus, a mutation of something old, something that had always been there in the background, hiding. At first, the symptoms were harmless. A fever, a cough, a fleeting malaise. But it spread quickly, and by the time we realized the true threat, it was already too late. The cities fell first. Then the small towns, the countryside, the farms that once fed us. People turned on one another, not just because of fear, but because of desperation. Survivors were forced to flee, to adapt, to become something else. There are no governments left. There are no borders, no rules. Only the survivors and the dead. And us. We still survive. But for how long? I'm broadcasting on the last functional frequency I could find. Frequency 404, named after the error code that appeared when we tried to connect with the outside world after the fall. It's been weeks since I've heard another human voice. But I'm still here, still broadcasting, because there's always a chance that someone somewhere is still listening. And if you are, you'll hear my voice, and you'll understand what has happened. And maybe you'll understand why we keep fighting, why we have to. The first days were nothing like what we'd prepared for. Oh, we'd seen the movies, read the books, heard the theories. It was always some quick and brutal collapse, something so fast we'd never have time to prepare. But that's not how it happened. No, it was much worse. It was slow. Too slow. That's the thing they don't tell you when you read about the apocalypse. The fear, the constant tension, builds gradually. You don't notice it at first, but the world begins to tilt. Things start to break down, just a little at a time. We were still connected to the world for a while. The internet didn't collapse immediately. Social media was alive with messages, pictures, and video updates, like some warped parody of normal life. People were still going to work, still posting selfies at their local coffee shops, oblivious to what was brewing. And then the news started. At first, it was nothing serious. A virus outbreak in some remote area, an isolated incident here or there. But it spread, faster than anyone could have predicted. Cities started locking down. People started wearing masks, and the government issued guidelines. Stay inside, quarantine, self-isolate. I remember the first time I heard the word quarantine on the news. It sounded like something you read about in history books, something from a past disaster. But it was real, and it was only the beginning. It didn't take long before the hospitals overflowed, and the virus, it didn't just kill. No, it did something far worse. It turned people, changed them. They came back, not the same, but not gone either. The first time I saw a walker, that's what we called them later, though I don't know if the term really fits, was at a hospital. I'd gone to check on a friend who had been infected. She had a fever, a cough. By then it was too late. The doctors didn't know what to do. She was one of the first to turn. I still remember how she looked when she came back. Her eyes wide and empty, Her skin pale, almost gray. Her lips were blackened, as though the infection had taken over her entirely. And the worst part? She didn't even remember me. The doctors, the few who were still around, couldn't stop it. We couldn't stop it. The world fell apart right before our eyes. People thought it would be like any other outbreak. A quarantine here, some medicine there, and we'd be fine. But this wasn't any other outbreak. This was different, and it was spreading faster than anyone could predict. When the first major city fell, the media tried to downplay it, but it was too late. The outbreak was already global. Within days, entire countries shut their borders. The air felt like it was charged with something else, the threat of total collapse. People weren't just sick anymore. They were dangerous. The government declared martial law, but it didn't matter. The systems fell. They couldn't even stop the panic. Among the chaos, a few of us managed to escape. At first, we didn't know what we were running from, the infected or the end of everything we knew. We didn't know if we were going to survive. I remember one of the first faces I met after leaving the city. Her name was Sarah. She was running from a group of infected. She had a rifle, but it was useless. They were everywhere. The whole street was crawling with them, slow-moving but relentless. I pulled her into an abandoned building just as they closed in. "I thought I was done for," she said, breathless. "Not today," I told her. We waited. I kept my head down, and we listened to the groans from the street below. She was one of the lucky ones, but her story didn't end there. No one's does. Then there was Mike. I found him on the outskirts of the city, right after the first wave of violence. He was holed up in a small grocery store, picking through shelves. I almost didn't approach him. I had no idea who he was or whether I could trust him. But there's something about survivors. You can spot them from a mile away. Mike was no different. He was resourceful, calm under pressure, and damn good at scavenging. He told me he had a wife and a daughter. They were gone now. "They didn't make it," he said, voice flat. He didn't even need to explain. I knew. When I asked him about his plans, he just shrugged. "Get by. Keep moving. Try not to get bit. That's all we can do." I didn't ask him what else was out there. Not yet. We were both just trying to survive. But I could tell something in his eyes had changed. Whatever Mike had been before, that person was gone now. And then there was Ellie. Ellie was one of the most unexpected survivors I'd ever come across. She was a nurse, or had been anyway. She was a little older than me, maybe in her late 30s, but she had that calm, no-nonsense attitude that was hard to ignore. At first, she didn't talk much. She just took charge, got to work, setting up makeshift medical stations, organizing our supplies. People listen when someone knows what they're doing, and Ellie had a way of making sure no one forgot it. She said she couldn't save everyone, but if she could save just one. Her voice cracks as she talks about the people she couldn't save. The ones who came to her with wounds, with bites. It was never easy. But Ellie kept going. She never stopped trying to help, even when the world had stopped helping. The first days of the outbreak were the hardest for all of us. The chaos, the confusion, the overwhelming loss. But there was still something worth fighting for. Each of us had our reasons. We were survivors, after all. Even in the worst of times, there's always a reason to keep going. Days turned into weeks. The once bustling cities, filled with the hum of modern civilization, were now nothing but empty husks. Nature, too, seemed to grow quieter, almost as if it was mourning the world that had been lost. but we kept moving, always moving. That was the only constant we had left. The survivors were few, but we were a stubborn bunch. Every day felt like a battle, and in some ways, it was. We had learned quickly that the world didn't care about us anymore. We were no longer the rulers of Earth. We were just another part of the food chain. In the first days, we relied on whatever was left. Power grids were down. Water was scarce. Food? Well, we found what we could. But we couldn't rely on that forever. Then, one day, we heard rumors of a safe haven. A place where people had managed to survive, where food and water were rationed and protected. It wasn't much, but it was something. We decided to go after it. Mike had his doubts, as always. "How do we know it's not just another trap?" he asked, his hand instinctively tightening around his rifle. Ellie was quieter than usual. She hadn't said anything in hours. I could see the tension in her face. She was thinking about something. Maybe about the people she'd tried to save. Maybe about the lives we couldn't protect. But Sarah, she was different. She was the one who believed. The one who said we had to try. We couldn't just give up. "If there's a chance," she said, "we have to take it. We owe it to the ones we lost." The journey was brutal. We were constantly on edge, not just because of the infected, but because we were losing time. The safe haven, we learned, was far, much farther than we'd originally thought. The landscape had changed, too. Cities had become ruins. The few roads still passable were filled with debris and vehicles abandoned in haste. The air was thick with a strange kind of stillness, as if even the winds were too afraid to blow. At night, we'd set up camp wherever we could find shelter. Sometimes it was an abandoned house. Sometimes it was just under the stars. In those quiet moments, I would think about who we were before all of this. I wondered if we'd ever go back to the lives we'd left behind. Could we ever return to what we once knew? Or were we destined to stay in this strange new world? Mike was always the first to stand guard. Even when he was exhausted, he didn't want to show any weakness. Sarah, on the other hand, would always check the perimeter. She'd walk out sometimes, into the darkness, not saying a word. I'd hear her footsteps crunching in the gravel, and I'd wonder if she was running from something or running towards something. Ellie spent most of the time keeping our wounds treated, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. The reality was setting in. There was no end in sight. We had learned to avoid large groups of the infected. They were everywhere, but sometimes you didn't have a choice. Sometimes they came to us. One night, as we were about to settle down for the evening, the ground shook. I remember that feeling, the heavy thud in the air, the way the world seemed to tremble beneath us. We grabbed our gear and headed out. It wasn't long before we saw them, a horde, shambling slowly in the direction of our camp. We were too close to outrun them, and there wasn't much cover nearby. "Get back!" Mike shouted. "Move!" But we couldn't move fast enough. They had seen us. The sounds of moans and growls filled the air as the first of the infected stumbled forward, their eyes vacant, mouths hanging open. The horde was too large to take on head-to-head. We had to use the environment. We split up, running in different directions, trying to lead them away from our camp. I kept my breathing steady as I darted through the ruins of a nearby building. The infected followed me, slow but relentless. I could hear their footsteps echoing in the dark, the grotesque sounds of bodies dragging themselves across the concrete. There was no time to think, only to act. I found a dead-end alley, but the infected were right behind me. Their growls grew louder. I had no choice. I had to make my stand. With my back against the brick wall, I raised my rifle and fired. The first shot hit one of them square in the forehead, but the others kept coming. They didn't stop. The rifle clicked empty. Damn it. I cursed under my breath, fumbling for the sidearm at my belt. That's when I heard it. A loud bang. Another shot. Another. Mike. Mike was there. He was on the other side of the alley, picking off the infected one by one, clearing a path. "Come on," he yelled. "Let's go." I didn't need to be told twice. We ran, sprinting for our lives. By the time we made it to the others, the horde had been dealt with, but we were all shaken. Ellie checked our wounds as Sarah stood watch. "We're getting close," Sarah said. There was a glint of hope in her eyes. "I can feel it." The next day, as we neared the coordinates for the safe haven, we stopped to rest. But things weren't as they seemed. From a distance, we saw smoke rising in the air. It wasn't a good sign. Ellie, Mike, and I approached cautiously, but Sarah and I didn't say a word to each other. We both knew the same thing. "Do you think they're still there?" she asked. I didn't know. I wanted to say yes, but in my gut I could feel it. We had been moving toward hope, but what if hope was just another lie? We moved through the ruins carefully, the smoke growing thicker as we got closer. The wind carried the faint, acrid smell of burning wood and something else, a sharp, metallic scent that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't the smell of a normal fire. This was different, almost unnatural. We kept our distance, peeking through broken windows and around the corners of abandoned buildings. There was no sign of movement, but the smoke still rose into the sky, twisting and billowing like some dark omen. "What happened here?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. I could see the fear in her eyes. This wasn't the kind of safe haven we had imagined. We had all heard rumors of people banding together, of surviving communities. But this didn't look like any place where hope could thrive. We cautiously advanced, moving from shadow to shadow. Our weapons were at the ready, our senses heightened. We didn't know what had happened here, but we were going to find out. The ruins stretched for miles, the landscape eerily silent except for the occasional distant rumble of falling debris. We were getting closer now, the smoke thickening. The ground beneath our feet stained with something darker. The road ahead was blocked by an overturned vehicle, its tires burnt and melted. We climbed over it, my mind racing with questions. We finally came to the outskirts of the supposed safe haven. At first I thought it was deserted, but as we peered around the corner, we saw something that caught us off guard. A figure, a person, was standing on a rooftop, looking down at us. They didn't move. "Who's that?" Mike muttered, his hand instinctively going to his rifle. I didn't have an answer, but I felt an uneasy knot in my stomach. There was something strange about this place. We had heard rumors of people trying to create new societies, but this felt different. It felt like a place where something had gone terribly wrong. "Maybe they can help us," Sarah said, a hint of hope in her voice. "Maybe they know what happened here." The figure on the rooftop finally moved. They crouched down, then disappeared from sight. It was as though they had vanished into thin air. We waited, the air thick with tension. After what felt like an eternity, the figure reappeared at the base of a building. Their eyes locked with ours, and I could feel the weight of their gaze. They didn't speak at first, but the silence between us felt like 1,000 unspoken questions. "Are you from here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The person nodded, their face shadowed by a hood. Their clothes were torn and worn, just like ours. They didn't look like the saviors we had been hoping for, but they were alive. "This place is not what it seems," the person finally spoke. "It used to be a safe haven, yes, but now it's a trap." A cold chill ran down my spine. We had come so far, and now it seemed we were standing on the edge of another nightmare. The person introduced themselves as Lucas, a survivor who had once believed in the safety of this place. He had been here when the community first started, when there was food, water, and a semblance of order. But it hadn't lasted long. "The people here weren't as they seemed," Lucas continued. "At first, they were just scared. We all were. But then something changed. The longer we stayed, the more desperate they became. People turned on each other. Food became scarce. And those who had power, they didn't just want to survive. They wanted control." As he spoke, I could see the bitterness in his eyes. He was a man broken by the very thing he had fought to survive: humanity itself. "They started to build walls," he said. "And I'm not talking about walls to keep the infected out. These walls were to keep us in. They started to divide us, turn us into commodities." I felt a sense of dread creeping over me. Could it be true? Could people really become that desperate? And when I tried to leave, Lucas paused, his eyes haunted by the memory. They tried to kill me. I barely made it out with my life. The others? They're still there, but I can't go back. We stood in silence, processing what Lucas had just revealed. The notion of a safe haven had been shattered. There was no safety here. There never had been. The decision was clear now, but the weight of it was unbearable. "We can't go back," Mike said, breaking the silence. His words were heavy, final. But Sarah, still holding on to the hope that we might find something worth saving, spoke up. "What if there's a way to fix it? What if we can take control back from them?" I could see the conflict in her eyes. The idea of turning back seemed impossible to her. She couldn't give up hope. Not now. Not after everything we had been through. But I knew. We couldn't save them. Not all of them. Not the way things had turned out. "We have to keep moving," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "We can't afford to stay. Not here. Not with them." Lucas nodded, his face grim. "I know it's hard, but I've seen what happens when hope becomes a weapon. People use it to manipulate others, to break them down. And when there's nothing left, they turn on each other. It's just survival. It's all we've got now." With no place to turn but forward, we gathered what little we could salvage and began the long trek away from the shattered remains of the safe haven. The world outside hadn't become any kinder. Every step we took felt heavier than the last. The echoes of the past seemed to haunt us, mocking us with every turn. But we knew we had no other choice. As the sun dipped below the horizon, we pressed on. We were tired, hungry, and broken, but we were alive, and that had to mean something. The world had changed, but so had we. We were no longer just trying to survive. We were trying to find a new meaning in a world that had forgotten what it meant to be human. Would we find a new place to call home? Would we build a new community of survivors, one where trust and cooperation could return? Or would we, like so many others, become a part of the darkness? Only time would tell. But as we walked into the night, we knew one thing for certain. We weren't giving up.